Hello, Thought Roomies. Our guest this week is my friend Colin Frangicetto. Before releasing this episode, I'd asked Colin to send me his bio, and I'm just going to read you the text he sent me because it perfectly encapsulates why I love Colin so much. He said, "The only bio I usually submit these days is Colin Frangicetto is a multidisciplinary artist who loves you. He lives and works in Portland, Oregon with his wife, Sarah, and many furry animals." So there you have it, succinct and very true and very Colin, but beyond that, he is so much more. He's such a funny person to follow on social media, and he's got so much creativity and spunk. He's one of the guitarists for the rock band Circa Survive, and he's also, on top of all of that, an incredible artist. All you have to do to find his work is just search for Colin Frangicetto art, and I think that you will be absolutely dazzled by what you see. In this episode, we talk about synchronicities and what does it mean when synchronicities are occurring in your life? Do coincidences exist, or what's really going on here? We talk about the hero's journey, and we use the framework set out by Joseph Campbell to explore and do a deep dive into Colin's recent experience in Peru with the sacred plant medicine ayahuasca. Colin also shares about his encounter with what he calls a, quote, higher dimensional octopus. On top of all that, this episode was recorded only a week or so after I had gotten into a car accident back in October. And with this event still pretty fresh and raw, I had the opportunity to share some of the revelations that came as a result of the intense, all-encompassing fear that occurred when I thought I might have accidentally taken another human's life. So I really hope that you get to listen to the end of this podcast. Colin has a booming voice, just perfect for podcasting, and a heart and a mind filled with wisdom to match it. So if you need more Colin at the end of this, like you need more cowbell, then you're in luck. And also, if you didn't get the cowbell reference, shame on you, and Google that immediately. In any case, a quick podcast search of Colin Frangicetto will bring up loads of other interviews that Colin has done on some of my other favorite podcasts, which you might possibly also know and love. Also, Colin recently started his own podcast called The Cosmic Nod, which you can listen to and subscribe to anywhere that you get your podcasts. So without further ado, please join me in the Thought Room with Colin Frangicetto. Colin Frangicetto, welcome to the Thought Room.
Thank you.
I am so excited to meet you in person. We actually met in person last night at now new friend of mine, Jennifer, puts on. So Whitma is Well-Being in the Modern Age. And you were actually a panelist last night, which I'm sure we'll get to. But
Sure.
We first met online.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience is of how we connected? And I mean, I definitely have my version of the synchronicity, but
Totally. Well, I was listening to our mutual friend Eric Godsey's podcast, "The Myths That Make Us," and I was really enjoying your episode with him, and I think there was just like a few interesting synchronicities that happened while I was listening, and I felt like they were worthy of sharing. So I reached out to you, as I often do, to people that I feel a connection to. Like, I felt an instant connection to your energy, like your story, the way you told your story, and then the way that you were interpreting some of the myths, kind of lined up with the way I was interpreting. So,
right, because I was retelling the Shel Silverstein children's book, The Giving Tree, right? And you had some connection to that.
Yeah, it was a matter of symbiosis, I believe, and as soon as you started talking about, kind of like, remembering that story, retelling that story, and I was remembering it, and I was just getting kind of a new, I guess I always recognized the symbiosis in it, but in that moment, it was really clear to me because I had been talking to my dad about the word symbiotic. And so as I was listening to the podcast, I was texting with my dad and talking about something separate. And I said, symbiotic's one of my favorite words. And we were discussing the nature of, those relationships. And then that's when you started telling the story. And I was like, wow, this is actually a perfect example of this. And then I think the way Eric was interpreting it was different. And then I was like, oh, I want to reach out and just give my take. And you welcomed it. And I think I may have even had some more that, I don't know. There's so many at this point.
With the symbiosis, I'm curious now because it's been a while since we talked about it. But was it the idea of the tree giving back to the boy and the boy giving back to the tree in this kind of endless cycle?
Exactly. And there was like a beautiful sadness to it, which the sadness is only in that it was showing the boy throughout his entire life, right? And I get that anytime I see a film that spans someone's entire life, shows them from birth till the end, or at least them in old age, that instantly it gives me this feeling of beautiful sadness,
So true.
And so that's what that story did for me. Not only in that moment, but when it first connected to me as a kid. And I think it hints at, kind of eternity and also, finality. It has both in there, because it's really kind of showing. I mean, we can interpret this through all kinds of lenses, and I think people probably have, a more political lens, a more feminine, you can go all kinds of ways with it. But on the surface, and I don't want to project my interpretation onto Shel, but it felt like that's what the essence of the story was. It was showing almost this, this relationship between nature and humans, which, I mean, I see humans as part of nature, but in this relationship, it was showing how this one thing is going to go on and on and on, and this other thing is like just here for a little bit. So that's one part of it. That's sort of the sadness part of it, because the boy can't be with the tree forever unless maybe the man gets buried under the tree, which I would like to think that's what happens.
You're such a sentimental. It must be the fact that you're a Cancer too.
Probably.
Right, because we have the same birthday.
We do.
July 3rd. That was
3rd.
Another thing that we just randomly discovered. I don't even know how that came up.
I saw you post that it was your either it was your birthday the next day or it was your birthday, and I was like, oh, there it is.
Wow. Yeah. I'm thinking about what you said about when you watch a movie and you see the whole person's life. I share that. I mean, I'm thinking of just like Benjamin Button or what's that movie with...
That was in my head. I was literally thinking about, yeah. You just took that right on the
I'm not surprised. And the other one I was thinking of is that movie Big Fish. Such a good movie. And there's definitely that sentimentality there. And I wonder why that is. Like, if when we can suddenly see the whole scope of a human life, we feel this welling of compassion, and suddenly there are the threads of the intricacy, the pain, the pleasure. I don't know. What's your opinion of that?
I think it's memento mori, like it's a reminder that you will die. And I think that's something that, at least for, I would say, the last, I don't know, probably ever since I took LSD at 14, I have not had a day where I don't think about the fact that one day I will die. And I don't think about it in a doom and gloom kind of way. It's just, I think it's a really powerful way to live. And it reminds me to enjoy time with other people. But I think, I think that that's what that is. I think when we see that, it is a reminder,
I wonder why it feels so difficult sometimes to also remember that about other people. Like, we do this separation thing, this othering, where if we could just, like Benjamin Button style, peep into somebody's like entire life story, we would have a lot more compassion for the fact that they just cut you off in traffic or cut you in line or just said something
right,
asshole-ish. We'd be like, oh, they have a long life of things,
Yeah, or just simply like remembering that they were a child, that they were, at some point, they were just this little cherub running around, vulnerable to all kinds of things, the same as us. And somehow they had a path that led them to that moment, and they might be having a hard time in that moment. And,
There's this is making me think of something I heard on a podcast. I believe it was Tara Brach's podcast and lectures, which I'm just so in love with her.
She's incredible.
And she shares this practice. I'm not sure where she got it from, but she talks about standing in front of another being and looking into their eyes. And you repeat something like, I am going to die. You are going to die. And we have only these precious few moments together.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Super intense.
It's super intense. But I like intense.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Amazing. So going back to cycles, and this whole idea of the life cycle and the boy in the tree and the symbiosis, we could apply that to what you were actually a panelist talking about last night, which is the hero's journey. And maybe for those who are listening to this, they don't know anything about Jung, they don't know anything about the hero's journey, they don't know anything about Campbell. Maybe you could give a little bit of a synopsis there.
I think it's referred to a lot in writing circles as a narrative device, kind of like an overlay of the story, and how, and it's true, pretty much every great story that we're familiar with some, very few exceptions, follow this archetype. And it's essentially, something that Joseph Campbell laid out. He matched it to Jung's map of the psyche, and essentially made this circular cycle that a character goes through. Now, in the story version of it, it's basically like, your protagonist, your hero. There's many sections of it. I think, in fact, his is maybe like 14 parts, but the really simple, breakdown of it is 3. And it's the departure, and then there's the journey, and then there's the return, and but essentially we're all heroes in our own story. And in many ways, what Campbell was trying to say is that you can apply this to to your life, and you can see how at any given point in your life that you're somewhere in this cycle. And what's even more fascinating about it is, some people, like the way we were just talking about seeing a movie and watching someone go from birth to death, right? Some people would instantly think, oh, well, that's one hero's journey. And it's like, no, actually, there's many journeys within that one big journey. And that's what last night I was trying to get at when I was saying it's a fractal, it's a fractalized pattern. So there's the one big journey, birth to death. And some could even argue, depending on your ontological set, that maybe that doesn't count because as a newborn, you're not really ready to accept the call. You're kind of thrust into this. Some people like to think that we choose it. I mean, I think it ranges, but I think the important part is to remember that you have many hero's journeys in your life, and it's super fascinating.
Yeah, I certainly personally relate to that, and I have a feeling that you do as well. This idea of dying many times in this life, and when we're saying that, I was thinking this last night because it gets tossed around so ubiquitously in these circles. Oh, you have to die over and over. To someone who's never heard that, we're not talking about the physical body. We're talking about the ego and our personality, really, and kind of going through these hero's journey cycles of death and rebirth within the same life. And I know that, well, I would love to hear about some of those times you feel that you've been reborn. But before we get to that, I was wondering if you could just briefly touch on the different stages of the hero's journey.
Sure. So, I think the one thing that is pretty universal is that there's like this homeostasis that is happening in the beginning. And there's this normalcy, and quite often, at least especially through the framework of like a story, there's sort of like a, I would say a dissatisfaction, or a indifference to one's life. We can think about Luke Skywalker, kind of being ready to fly the coop and kind of feeling stuck and feeling like he's meant for something more, but doesn't quite know what, doesn't know how to get out of the predicament. He's kind of, you can tell he loves his family, but at the same time, he feels like it's my time to go. And so in this first stage, essentially, you're waiting on a call, and the call usually comes in some form of either it's a, kind of an intense moment of kind of forced action, it gives you a choice, like, in his example, Skywalker, I believe it was sort of like this impending, invasion from this other force, and he gets sucked in via these droids, essentially. These like, and there's they talk a lot about like this idea of like a blunder, like some random thing that just kind of falls in this person's lap, and then kind of begins the initiation of like, it's like a curious moment, out of the ordinary, kind of like, that's funny. And then it's sort of like, at this point, there's either an acceptance of the call or a refusal. And people don't talk about the refusal enough, in my opinion, because it's not universal. It's not in every story, but certainly in our human stories, it's extremely common. And it's probably one of the most common things that we struggle with is this call that's happening. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not subtle, but it's beckoning you, and all these opportunities to take it. And what that means by taking it is you're basically accepting the fact that you have to leave your cushy, normal, whatever it is, whatever you've carved out that internally is not satisfying you, and you want more. So you have an opportunity to shed this kind of comfort, predictable situation and go out into the unknown. And that's really where the first stage is, like, the departure. The hero at this point chooses to say, I love what I have, or, whatever. I would probably be like, I love what I have, but I have to go. Sometimes it's obviously not that bright and sunny, but so they leave, the departure happens, and somewhere in the middle of the journey, I mean, the journey section is long, and there's many archetypes that kind of come in and out of this, but normally there's the ones that are pretty universal, is that like a wise sage type figure comes into the picture, or like a teacher, and a mentor. Sometimes that can just be I would say for me, that came in the form of like many books, that came in the form of many adults that kind of all played different roles and made this one Frankenstein of an adult that was showing me what I wanted to be. But yeah, wise mentor, teacher comes in and kind of offers assistance throughout this part. And to not make this entire podcast about it, essentially there's all kinds of struggle. Eventually there's a dark night of the soul, which is, you've come so far and you feel like you have to be where you're supposed to be. This has to be it, but truly it's not. And you feel like somehow you must have gotten lost along the way. There's no hope. You're never going to get to the thing you need. And usually that's, a catalyst for the breakthrough, which is essentially, finding the treasure, finding the thing you were questing after. And then the next part is the return, which is essentially, if we're looking at through the lens of things that we're familiar with, that's integration. That's how do you bring back something and then use it and kind of retell the tale, like retell what you've been through in a meaningful way. So like you're passing knowledge, or maybe you'll become the sage for someone else's journey. But there is this, that's the long version. Last night was like, I told, the story of, I was going through a period where I had one hero's journey every day. It was from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And, so I don't know, I could go on forever about it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the dark night of the soul, and in particular, a theme that I've been marinating on a lot lately is surrender. And I'm wondering if, in your opinion, that is sort of an innate part of the dark night of the soul, because there's all this willing and doing and movement and pushing, and I'm at the thing and it's not working, and I just, I can blah, blah. And then there's just this cracking open of, okay, well, maybe I failed, or maybe there's actually nothing I can do in this moment. And that's where the magic comes in.
I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe not cinematically the way we're so used to, where it happens in that very moment. But I do think that shortly thereafter, I mean, it's probably a range for everyone, but for myself, it's usually like you have the dark night of the soul, and then it's not, necessarily Amazon Prime speed, but it's like, just the regular shipping, which can be
3 to 5 business days.
Which we both know that's sometimes 7 to 9.
Right.
It can take a bit. Yeah.
Well, this is now making me think of little bits of the stories you were telling last night after the event about your recent plant medicine journey and some moments that you had in ceremony of the dark night of the soul appearing to you. I wondered if you might want to talk about that.
Sure. So I was recently in Peru. I did 5 ceremonies with my friend Michael. We were at Blue Morpho.
So ayahuasca.
Oh yeah, sorry. 5 ayahuasca ceremonies right outside of Iquitos, Peru. And, I definitely had moments that were difficult. I had moments that were, extremely blissful and beautiful. But I had, Michael went through, I would say, he describes his experiences as the hero's journey every single ceremony for him. He would start it and then end it and then start it and then end it. And then for myself, I had a more elongated narrative arc that seemed to stretch over all of my ceremonies. But oddly enough, my dark night of the soul definitely came night 2. And do you want the story? I want
the I want the juicy story.
Okay. Yeah. So night 2, I had a really good night 1. So,
what does that mean to have a good night 1?
Yeah. I think I stayed on the surfboard, if you will.
Yeah.
It was like, I felt like I had done everything I could do to prepare. And I also let go of the idea that I could be prepared. And my wife actually, she gave me some really amazing advice, and she's never experienced the medicine before, but she's very tapped in, and she made me promise to do something on the first night. She just said, listen, before your ceremony, you need to go out barefoot, find a spot. You need to close your eyes, envision yourself basically becoming part of the earth. The roots are pulling you down, basically a grounding exercise, And once you're connected, it's like, I want you to give away all of my energy. I want you to give away all of your family's energy, all of your friends. I know you want to take me with you, but you can't. And when she told me that, it sounded wise, and I knew, and it resonated with a lot of the other things I was feeling before. I made a will. I did it all. I did everything I could to convince my subconscious that in that moment, should you need to let go, let go. But so she told me that, and before the first ceremony, I went and did that in front of this tree, which had eye vines all around it, and it was this beautiful, gigantic tree right outside the ceremony house. And so night 1, I had a moment where it was like a fraction of a second where I could sense my grasping, like, oh no, my people, like, don't take me, and it was just instantly, it was like I reconnected to that moment of giving it all away. It was like, oh no, you already gave all that away. And then another voice came in and just like, fully let it go now. And it was calming, and I did. And in that moment, at least reflecting back on it, I was like, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I did that. And she was very wise to tell me to do that. Night 2, well, I should just say that night 1, I found myself over and over again, after being obliterated and then put back together. And,
people who have never heard of ayahuasca are listening to this going, what the heck is he talking about?
Yeah, I'll just say that, the medicine can be really strong to a point where, you know, you kind of, you, like we were saying earlier, you die, you ceremonially die. And the medicine has a way of basically, you know, if you're not familiar with psychedelics, if you're not familiar with the idea of ego death, and the idea of sort of what these things can do in the moment when you're in them, is, you know, I started losing any sense of like my Colin-ness. You know, I was in there and it was like, I could feel my limbs disappearing. I could feel everything sort of going. And it was like all of my memories, all of my, everything that makes me me was kind of just evaporating, disintegrating, blowing away into the wind. And I think what was so wise about what Sarah told me to do was, I think your instinct in that moment is to try to hold on to all those things and hold on to all those pieces. And like, instead, you know, it really is, advised to let go and don't fight, because that's what you're here to do. That's basically what you're there.
Surrender.
Yes, exactly. So, so yeah, night 2, I couldn't do that. And I wouldn't even say it was like the specific grasping. It was like I got tricked. It was like someone pushed me off the surfboard, you know, because it caught me off guard. Essentially, it started out with something really simple, like I needed to pee a half hour in. And the medicine was just completely weighing me down. And I did not have human vision. I could not, I knew there was no way I could navigate.
Did you say you were experiencing like insect vision or something?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. It was like, I think I had multiple types of vision. Like it would shift. It would be distinctly non-human, but distinctly something, you know, like I would get this sense like, oh, this is insect vision. Like, oh, this is what it looks like to be a bird. This is what it looks like to see through the eyes of like a snake. Like just constantly. But yeah, never just the regular human vision, which at this point I was like, please, I just need to
just want Colin vision.
I just want to walk. Can I have it back just so I can walk to the bathroom and pee? So in that moment, it started a spiral. You know, I knew that I was only a half hour in and that it was going to be a long time before I could go. But this is where a part of myself, a very stubborn part, a part that's like, I will prevail, you know, I can get through this. And also a part that was like too prideful to ask for help. Was like, fuck it, I'm going to hold it. And yeah, I dug my own grave with that one.
I'm going to hold it.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. That speaks on multiple layers there. So
you held your pee and all your feelings.
Exactly. And yeah, there was just like this thought spiral that came out of that was, you know, basically my inner narrative and my sense of self fractured out. And there were all these various parts that were kind of discussing what was going on. And there was one part being like, you need to ask for help. And another part that was like, nope, I'm not asking for help. And it was like, you always do this. And like, no, this is different. Back and forth. Then it started showing me kind of like with courtroom precision all the times in my life that I needed help and didn't ask for it.
Yeah, you said it was like a montage.
Like a film strip.
Yeah.
Just boom. And it would kind of push me into some of the scenes to look at it. And at this point, again, like logical thought is just not there. So I start dialoguing with what I perceive as something outside of myself, you know, saying, okay, I get it. Just stop. Like, all right, it's all right. And it was like, no, you don't get it. Like, you gotta ask for help. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna. Like, and then at some points I was bargaining. I was like, okay, I will, but just not right now. Listen, the Icaros are so beautiful right now. I'm gonna ruin someone else's experience if I ask for help. If I call for help, they're gonna think something's wrong. Like, I'm gonna shatter this tranquil moment.
Deep conditioning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so you're gonna. I started being convinced that I was gonna get organ damage from holding my pee so long, and that wouldn't convince me. I was like, nope, I'll just suffer through it. Whatever. I've held my pee really long before, And I'm like, nope.
This is so funny.
Yeah. So I just like, it was like this little kid, stubborn part of me just was like, nope, I'm not doing it. And then it got super surreal. I basically was perceiving that it was killing me again the way it did the night one, but it was different.
And by it, you mean the medicine.
The medicine.
Because you had a moment where you were convinced that you were dying.
Yeah.
Like physically dying, or the whole thing was
I was convinced
a paranoid's,
Yeah, I was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went. It was like it did it again where it took away all my limbs, and then I was just in this weird nothing for a bit, and I felt like, oh, okay, this is like the Bardo, this is like purgatory or something. And then I started like calling it purgatory because I was nauseous, but I couldn't puke, and then I had to pee and I couldn't pee, and or I wouldn't pee. That's more accurate. And so at this point, I started thinking I actually had died, and that that everyone in the room, everyone who had taken the medicine, was dead as well. This was what was coming to me after I was obliterated again. It was
That's a terrifying thought.
That we were all in it together, and we all somehow had gotten poisoned, as if our metaphysical plane had crashed, and we were in this eternal kind of like in between. And one of the shamans let out like a laugh, and it was totally innocent, because we all discussed this beforehand. Like, some people just are the happy Buddha, and it just comes out in ceremony, and you welcome that because you can't help it. Laughing's purging too. And he just let out a laugh, and somehow in that moment I interpreted that as so that day we brewed the medicine, and I interpreted his laugh to mean like, oh boy, we fucked up. They made the medicine wrong, and now we're dead. And because
fascinating, what the mind can do when you're clawing at the walls in that fear state.
Oh, totally.
It's just spinning realities.
Absolutely. Over and over again. And I don't know if it was before that or after that where I got this complete paranoid delusion that they had lured us there to like harvest our souls, and that it was just this huge big joke that they were like, haha, yeah, get enlightened. Haha, LOL.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Now we have you. And like but that was a pretty easy one for me to then see, like, oh, this is shadow material. Like, I recognize this. I understand where that's coming from. That is otherizing, appearing as some weird paranoid delusion in the medicine. And I started reminding myself, like, no. Remember the people in your circle. Remember the people that were crying this morning because of the healing they got last night. This is real. They're helping, reminded myself.
They're helping. Yeah. That's I think that one is such a common one when I hear people's stories about ayahuasca, is everybody has this moment of, I'm in a cult, or I'm actually being completely tricked, and I can't believe I was so stupid. I can't believe I bought into this whole thing. How embarrassing, and now I'm going to die. Yeah.
And that's part of the hero's journey for sure. It's like you have to see through that illusion, see that so much of it is projected by your own shit. and society shit, but that definitely comes with the territory when you're an outsider going to, you know, a ritual that is just so outside of our culture, you know. So that's gonna come, and I think I was luckily pretty prepared for that to pop up and felt at ease at kind of laughing at it, to be honest. Actually, that did happen before the laugh, because I remember when I heard the laugh, it erased my idea that the paranoia that they were in on it somehow. But I was like, oh no, like they mean well, but we fucked up and we're all dead, including the shamans. But so anyway, you know, basically, I was in this vortex of, you know, you need to ask for help, and no, I'm not gonna, back and forth for a really long time. And then I was convinced that the fate of the entire world was resting on this. Not only the entire world, but specifically everyone in the ceremony house was waiting for me to accept this.
To pee.
Yeah, to ask for help. Yes. It was all like as if they all knew that I was resisting. And it was like in the moments where everything was sort of quiet down, I felt like they were all just like, is he going to do it?
Right.
You know, is he going to do it?
Wow.
And I was just like, nope.
That's that like also imaginary audience thing where we think everybody's watching us.
Exactly.
All the time in life in general.
Oh, yeah, totally. Oh, that's such a good term.
Yeah.
Imaginary audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I felt like at this point now, it was like, well, the entire world is about to explode unless you ask for help. What are you going to do? And I was like, let this motherfucker burn. I'm not asking for help. You know, like, and it was so, it was incredible to realize that I had this much stubborn energy inside of me. Because there were other parts of me witnessing this and being like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Just ask for help. Like, it's not a big deal. So many people have asked for help in this circle. So many people have had it way worse and made it to the bathroom. It's not a big deal. But for whatever reason, you know, I just couldn't do it in that moment. And then it was like a buzzer went off. And it was basically like, and like, you failed. Mission not complete. It's over.
Yeah, you did not surrender, sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And then shortly after that, I mean, I was basically in this dark bardo space for what it felt like eternity. You know, I was getting caught in loops. The Icaros became infinite loops that were repeating. Noises in the room were happening exactly at the same spots in the songs. People's noises were happening at the same exact spots, which does happen.
Choreographed coughing and yawning.
Moaning,
and,
farting, everything all at the same time. And then one person would just be like, whoo, at this one spot. And that became like my life raft. Because like as soon as I recognized that, I was like, oh, that's my favorite part of the song. And
I like the part where the person goes woo.
The woo. And every time it would happen, I would just be like, oh, God, yes, thank you. And it was like my one spot to come up for air. That's what it felt like. And so that went on for a really long time. And I was getting these telepathic messages from one of the maestros. Like he was singing his Icaro, and it's not even in Spanish. It's in like a completely different dialect, and there's no way I could have understood it. But it was as if he was completely, like I understood every word somehow, and it was more than understand. It was like it was telepathic. I don't know. It was pure telepathy, and I was getting this message that he was telling me that life was like a river. And then I just needed to keep paddling. And so I'm sitting there like fighting back and like trying to paddle, and like
Were you actually moving your body, like paddling?
I was.
My gosh,
and I was
love that.
I was in a rocking chair, and I was just like, and I was like,
just rocking and paddling.
And I was like, I could like see him, even though we're in pitch black. I could like see him in his essence, like the whole time, and I was like trying to paddle towards him, like that was what I was going for. But then I would just lose steam, and I'd be like, fuck, I need to pee. And eventually I had the thought, if in fact I'm still alive, there is no way I'm drinking this sludge tomorrow night.
Also a common thought.
Oh yeah. And yeah, basically the lights came on, that beautiful moment. It's usually a very beautiful moment when they relight the lantern and all the light comes back into the room, which signifies ceremony's over. And usually at that point, you're still feeling it a little bit, but that has a way of kind of snapping you out of it. And there's this immense relief that comes with that usually, but not for me. And not that night. And as soon as that came back and I was like, okay, we are alive. I'm alive. But holy shit, it's over, and I'm so not even close to being done. Like, I'm still going so hard. And I, stumbled my way to the bathroom, peed, and there was no relief. And not only no relief, but I could feel something physical, like, in my bladder. Like, that's what I was feeling. And I was just so dizzy and nauseous, but couldn't throw up. And again, like, it just felt like I was right back in ceremony needing to pee, but I had just peed, and I was like, oh God, here we go. And so I made my way outside, and I was trying to just act myself into normal, just like going up to other people who were like all like in their post journey sort of bliss, like talking about their thing, and they're feeling what you can tell they're like pretty much back. And I'm looking at them, and their faces like turning into Legos and then crumbling. And like weird thing is, I'm seeing crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And finally, my friend Michael was just like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" Because he was just talking to me for a while. He was just in his thing, and he's talking to me, and I was like, oh, and I would just like lay down for a second, and then that would make me too dizzy. And then I would sit up, and then that would make me too dizzy. And then I would stand up, and then that would make me too dizzy. And then it was like, there's just no way.
Couldn't get comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when he noticed I was sort of having a rough time, he's like, you all right, man? I was like, no. He's like, what do you need? I'm like, I need help. Finally.
Wow.
But it was still a long way to go before I was going to be anything close to normal. I think I was tripping for like 12 hours, like going. And
did you throw up at all that evening?
a little bit. I crawled to the bathroom once Michael left me, which he kindly stayed with me for a couple hours. I asked him to, so I was like, I have no grip on anything right now. I was still, at this point, I was convinced that I would never feel the relief of peeing again, that this was my punishment for failing my test.
Eternal full bladder.
Yes. And that I was convinced that I would never be allowed to enjoy another moment. That was going to be my punishment.
Rational.
Very rational. Yeah, so, this went on, and I basically had this, it was a really powerful lesson at this point. I mean, it was like really sinking into me the weight of what happens when pride overrides a human need, which is like, we all need help, and I wound up having this really beautiful moment later. I remember you and I talked before I went on my journey. Mm-hmm. We talked. I did a little mini series an ayahuasca mini series, which I've yet to release, but I will release. And I talked to you about my octopus entity that I was scared to confront. And throughout the evening that night, I was seeing all kinds of weird shit. I was seeing intestines, snakes, lots of like slithering, slippery weirdness. But I was also seeing tentacles. And I was like, oh God, here we go. Fuck. So fast forward
He's
to
coming.
fast forward to much, much later. I'm in the ceremony house sleeping there because I couldn't make it to my bungalow. And lots of people sleep in the ceremony house, especially when they're still feeling the medicine. But so it was like kind of like a dorm sleepover there. But I still felt like completely alone somehow. I was like, it was very quiet and it's really dark. And I just kept having this feeling that it was bringing me back into ceremony when I thought I was dead, which was extremely lonely. Like, it was the most isolated loneliness I'd ever felt. And I'm sitting there feeling that over and over again, keep getting those waves of it. And all of a sudden I look up and I see this enormous octopus floating above me. And it's super passive. It's just floating there. And I get this feeling that it's sleeping. And I'm seeing the reflection from the pool outside is like kind of going onto the ceremony house structure. So it's making this very wave-like
On the inside of the ceiling?
Mm-hmm. So it's making me think that I'm under the ocean, and I'm thinking how we're both sleeping at the bottom of the ocean. And
You and the octopus.
yeah. And it struck me that this thing that I was really scared to confront, that I was like building up so much, and I talked to my therapist. We had multiple sessions about it and like how to handle it, embrace it, all this stuff. And I was still like, I don't know what I'm going to do, because it wasn't that I'm scared to hang out with an octopus. It was that I had a portal of synchronicities that revolved around octopi. And I felt like really what it was some type of entity that was sort of using the octopus as a symbol or a mask. And that it was like basically because those synchronicities led me to the medicine. Right. So I felt like it was luring me into the space in order to communicate. And I was like, oh God, what is it going to do? What is it actually going to be?
This was like meeting the boss.
Yeah.
The final level.
Yeah. So I was like, I just had all these, again, not rational, but like these experiences are just so otherworldly that anything can happen. And so here I am. And the irony is that I feel nothing but relief when I see this thing. I feel like comforted by the fact that it's there with me. I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And then it starts like telepathically communicating with me. And it's weird because I'm not hearing a voice, but there's still like this quality to it that I perceived as like slow and sort of like almost Eeyore-ish. And it basically was like, this is what it's like to be me. And I was just like, okay, what do you mean by that? And it's proceeded to sort of give me this, kind of like, well, how you feel really lonely or how you were feeling so lonely. That's how I felt when you denied my existence for so long and sort of wouldn't accept me. And, you kind of banished me into the world of the unseen and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, kind of having this weird thing with it. And it started giving me this really profound download about sharing experiences with other beings, and how if we were just isolated into our own experience all the time and we didn't have other people to bounce it off of, if we didn't have other beings to witness our story, to witness our experiences, our struggles, our triumphs, then it's all for nothing because it's just happening in a vacuum and you're just alone. So what is that, So it was giving me this really profound, like, just to share something with one other person is it gives meaning to all of this. And I just started like weeping. Started like just softly weeping, and all of a sudden didn't need to be anymore. Wasn't nauseous anymore. The purge had come, and I was like, wow. Like, first off, I just never considered, I knew that purging came in different forms, but I never considered that they could kind of like cross streams, if you will, like sort of like, oh yeah, like it just needs to come out, and if these other channels aren't working, it's going to come out in another way.
Like it doesn't matter whether you're peeing or laughing or vomiting or crying.
It's all the same thing.
It's stored there and it needs to come out.
Yeah. So
wow.
So that was really wild, and the first thing I knew when I woke up the next day was, I have to drink again tonight. I have to. I know I have to.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I remember you calling me before going and asking little tidbits, collecting things for your toolbox, and telling me the story about the octopus. And yeah, I was wondering if, just in short, for the people who didn't get to hear your story like I did, if you can just talk about what the octopus has meant in your life, and maybe a couple of the ways he popped up for you.
Sure. Well, about a little over a year ago, I was on tour, and I was in Hawaii, and I had a pretty profound mushroom journey with a few of my bandmates, and it was a pretty special, kind of rare time where we've never, as a group, taken mushrooms together. We rarely have ever even smoked cannabis together. The singer and I are longtime best friends, so we've had many journeys together, but as a group, no. So this was pretty special, and it was also a ridiculous setting, which was why we decided to do it, because we had this amazing house on this basically private beach, and it was just like it felt like heaven there. And yeah, I mean, it's a very long story, but essentially a dynamic played out between me and our bassist Nick, who's more skeptical. He's more on the skeptical side of things, and I would say I'm more neutral, but I lean believey. And so, yeah, we always talk about things like synchronicities and things that have a little bit of mystery to them. And I always just like to get his take on things. And he had a synchronicity happen a few days prior that he told me about. And I was like, so what do you think that's about? And he was just like, I don't know. It's neat. And I was like, that's it? He's like, it's neat. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, you just think they're random? And he's like, yeah. I was like, okay. I was like, I actually do think the example you gave me was random. But I'm like, what do you think it would take to just make you go, what the fuck? And he was like, I don't know, more than that though. I was like, fair enough. I was like, well, I hope I'm there. I hope I'm there for that moment that happens. And so, bam, the next night, like he literally verbatim had that moment.
Whoa.
And was like, what the fuck?
What happened?
Well, essentially, we were tripping, we were on the beach, and during our walk on the beach, I was trying to distract him because he was having some anxiety over one of our guys sort of was like way ahead of the group, and it was getting dark, and he Nick kind of goes into dad mode. I do as well sometimes, but he just kept, I could tell his anxiety was high, so I was just trying to distract him, and I was like talking about cephalopod DNA. I was like, have you ever heard that it's like comes from outer space? There's this theory that it's a Panspermia type of idea that cephalopod DNA comes from outer space. And they were just like, no, Like, what are you talking about? So I start this conversation. I start telling them about how, the theory revolves around their ability to change their RNA like in real time. So they can they have this really unique ability that is not seen in any other species. And there was this amazing document that came out, and all these scientists signed on to it, just basically saying like, yeah, it's very possible that.
What is that? So when an organism can change its RNA in real time, how does that manifest?
It's basically like it realizes that evolutionarily that it can make a change to improve like its survival ability. So that's why some of the stuff they do is it's constantly surprising people who are observing it, because they're like, oh, we've never seen it do this before. We've never seen it do this before. And it's because it keeps learning and it keeps making these changes. And so it's
evolving.
Yeah.
Wow. Really fast.
Yeah. And it has all kinds of other really unique abilities. Octopi specifically do some really interesting stuff. They can maneuver out of situations that are just kind of like unfathomable. And
yeah, they can squeeze into like tiny, like if you YouTube octopuses, is it octopi or octopuses?
I think
now?
You can say both,
because I think they keep switching it.
Yeah, everybody keeps switching.
Yeah, they can fit through a space that's like a couple inches wide, and just squeeze right through and pop out the other side, reformed like a sponge.
Absolutely. And their ability to camouflage is kind of insane. I mean, I think most people are familiar with just that type of footage where you don't think you're looking at anything underwater, and then all of a sudden it just sort of appears, and it's been there the whole time. And that kind of occurred in this experience where we were walking around, and after I had said this thing where I was talking about them coming from space, and I bumbled the story. I didn't even tell them the stuff about the RNA. I told them, because like it can change colors on demand. And they were like, but yeah, Nick, again, being the skeptical guy that is, like, but chameleons, they can do that too, and all this stuff. And like, I was like, oh yeah, huh, okay. And I just kind of like let it go. But then as we were walking and then it was getting dark and we lost one of our buddies, like a couple of minutes down the road, I have this experience where like we can't find him. And then I just sort of like look into the blackness, and it was like he just appeared, and he looked exactly like, it was like that kind of moment. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I'm like, have you been there the whole time? He's like, yeah. He's like, I heard everything you guys were talking about. He's like, it was really weird when you guys were talking about the octopi thing. I was having the moment with this squid guy over here. And like, apparently in this little, there was like this little, like, I don't know, it was like a rock area, which had like a little pool next to the ocean. And this little like baby squid was like, he was having a moment with it or whatever. So I don't think anything of it. I'm not even paying attention to the synchronicity here. And again, I think I'm just like, oh yeah, we were looking for you. Anyway, so fast forward to, don't forget that the night before I had, kind of put it out there. I can't wait to see, I hope I'm there to see your what the fuck moment. And so the part of this that I haven't told is that one of our members who wasn't going to partake basically was like, I'm going to take the people who gave you guys the mushrooms into town so that you guys can be on your own and not have to trip with strangers. And I'm going to go into town and I'm going to do some shopping and stuff, and I'll come back. And when he left, I said, like, keep your channels open. Just randomly. I just said, okay. And so
bye, keep your channels open. He's like, what?
Yeah. He totally didn't say anything back. He was just like, okay,
okay, Colin.
And so hours later, we had so many profound things happen in this journey, but so hours later, we're still feeling the mushrooms, and Nick and I, the guy who I was referring to the whole time, the skeptical guy, we take a pause from the beach and we go back into our house, and we're in there for a moment. And then Brendan comes home, and Brendan's the guy that went, into town. And he comes in, And it was like set up so perfect. It was like a fucking movie. It was like out of all of us, there was a pretty big, there's 6 of us total. And it's just Nick and I in the house. No one else to witness this. Brendan comes back. We're kind of happy to see him, but we have like, alien eyes. We're just looking at him like, hi, like, welcome back. Like, And he's like, hey, I want to show you some stuff I got. I'm like, okay. And I think he's just playful. He's just feeling like, like he doesn't understand the experience we're having. He has no idea anything that's gone down at all. He's like, check this out. I got this for T, his daughter. And he like pulls out this chameleon, this stuffed chameleon out of a bag.
Wow.
And Nick and I just look at each other and we're just like, huh. Like it's slowly coming to us like, this is strange. He's like, check out what it says. And I take the tag and I look at the tag on the chameleon and it says, I'm Colin the chameleon. Please look after me. And I'm just like, whoa, that is wild. And I'm looking at Nick, and Nick's kind of just slowly like, kind of squinting, being like, this is weird. And he's like, and then he says like, that's really weird. And I'm like, yeah, because like we were just down on the beach there. You weren't there, but we were talking about chameleons, but we were also talking about. And he's like, oh, I got this too, and he pulls out a stuffed octopus.
No.
And we just both lost our shit, and we started laughing and crying. And I was like, thank you. I knew it. I fucking knew it. And I just kept being like, oh my God.
A chameleon and an octopus.
Yeah, it was so specific. And then I just watched Nick go, what the fuck? And I was like, and there it is. There it is. There's our moment that I've been asking for.
Wow.
And, that in itself is a beautiful story and it's really powerful. But what occurred was I went home and I was integrating that experience. And I was, honestly, it was one of the most elating. Like it completely just gave me, I was like, man, that's going to juice me up for years.
It's
like
reaffirming.
It was so beautiful. And, sorry, microphone. And, I get home and throughout that time when I was traveling, that's when Michael reached out to me for the first time. Michael from Third Eye Drops. We had never met, I've known him for a little over a year. And he's like, oh yeah, you should come on the show. I'm like, okay, cool. So as soon as I got home, it was like the day I got home, we have a podcast and I tell that story at the end because we were talking about a few things throughout the episode, but we talked a little bit about psychedelic experiences and high strangeness. And I was like, I have a story for you. So I tell that story and it was like as if the second I told it on tape and it was going to be broadcast out there, like the floodgates opened. It was like I got off the podcast, we got off the Skype call, and then it was just like octopus, chameleon, synchronicities out the fucking ass for
everywhere.
Months.
Wow.
Every single day, upwards of dozen, like. And they were
give me a few little ones. Like you would see it on like billboards or things or.
Okay. So it was insane. It was totally insane. So, okay, there's one other animal involved here, and that's a turtle. And in the mushroom experience in Hawaii, not only was the chameleon and the octopi central to it, but what happened later that night was we had a very intense thing go down with a glow stick.
That sounds so
amazing.
I just want to etch that sentence into history.
I know.
With a glow stick.
Very intense thing happened with a glow stick, yes. And so what?
When are glow sticks not intense?
Yeah, also? Really. So long story short is that there was a glow stick that got thrown into the ocean and it was floating out there. And our sound guy Andy and I were like, that cannot stay out there.
Yeah,
we have to get that.
Yeah.
The waves were super intense. Mm-hmm. but we were like,
we're not leaving a glow stick in the ocean. Yeah.
we're like, it's gonna fucking kill a turtle. We're like, a turtle is gonna fucking eat that thing and choke, or it's gonna poison it. And we were just like, we gotta save the fucking turtle. So he and I went out there, and I was like his point man. He dove in and he swam, got the thing. We were like, we saved the turtle. And like, so that became a part of it too. So as I'm home, I'm right after this has all happened within 15 minutes of getting off the Skype call with Michael. I get a text from I'm telling this story to my band over text. Like I'm basically saying like, oh yeah, I just told the story, to this, guy, to the podcast, whatever. And they're like, oh, cool. And Brendan sends this thing back. He's like, I just had a weird synchronicity with your story. Like you're telling me the story, and I'm in line getting groceries, and this woman was like, oh, I really like your octopus tattoo. And he's like, it's a squid, but thanks. And she was like, yeah, I just always wanted to get, and she starts going off about how she's always wanted to get an octopus tattoo. And he's like, so I basically just freaked out and told her I had to go. He's like, but I wanted to text you real quick. And I was like, oh, that's funny. As he texts me that, my friend Craig, who I've still not been able to tell the story to at this point, he's like, hey, I love this album art. Check it out. And he sends me this Clutch album art that's like essentially this underwater scene, this ship, and then there's this octopus tentacle at the bottom. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that's really weird. And I'm thinking about how, like, I can't wait to tell him that. As that's happening, I'm walking around my house doing, like, kind of busy work, and I'm listening to Ramin Nazar's podcast because at this point, I was like, I want to meet this guy. I love him. I had sent him a message saying, like, I would love to, like, talk to you sometime. And we had established that I was going to see him coming up, and we were going to do a podcast. So I was listening to him. And I was listening to all his appearances on various things. And he's like talking about, I don't know. He was talking about all kinds of random shit. And then these guys start saying, what were they talking about? They're basically just talking about like childhood shows and things like that. And I'm like mindlessly walking around, and I had already had a weird synchronicity with Ramin. And he was just like, if any more happen, tell me. So I'm listening to him talk, and I get a knock on the door, and it's the postman. And I go out there and I grab this poster print. And I totally forgot that I had asked my friend. I'm like, oh, I really like that artist. Do you have anything from them? I was like, oh yeah, I have a print or something. I'll send it to you. I didn't know what was coming. And so as I'm listening to Ramin, I'm like opening up the print. And I pull it out, and it's this print from this artist, Joe Roberts. His handle is LSD World Peace on Instagram. He's an amazing artist, but he's known for smoking DMT and making art like related to DMT. So I open up the print, and it's a Ninja Turtle with DMT written underneath of it, and it says, "The plants control you," right? I open this up, and as I look at it, the host of the podcast goes, oh yeah, Ninja Turtle, like out of nowhere, it just says Ninja Turtle as I'm looking at it, and I'm like, what the I was like, ah! I just sort of like actually like screamed a little bit out loud, and I was like, whoa, all right, this is getting too intense. Like the text thing, and I'm like, and don't forget, like this is like 2 days after. So I'm still like kind of reeling, and pattern recognition is at very high. So, okay. I'm like, all right, I'm going to shut all channels. No input is happening. Off podcasts, shut off YouTube. Nothing's going to give me a synchronicity right now, because I feel like I'm one synchronicity away from kind of
losing your mind.
Yeah, going crazy. So I'm like, all right, what can I do here? And I decide that I'm going to unpack my bags and stuff. And I had started a trip box a few months prior, where I just started putting all these special, crystals that someone would give me or I'd find, or like a memento. Or I used to take, as a kid, I would take like disposable cameras a lot when I would take acid, and I would, so I have a bunch of these photos in there. I decided, I'm going to put a couple things in there. I had some sand from Hawaii that I kept, and I was going to just put that in there. Then I remembered I had this copy of this book called Trip by this guy, Tao Lin. I had gone to sit with him and meet him before I went on this whole journey. This was prior to Octopi, Synchronicities, and all this stuff. And I went to see him do a reading at Powell's. And his book is about his experience with psychedelics, and also deep fascination with Terence McKenna and Kathleen Harrison, McKenna's ex-wife. And so I go to meet him weeks before this crazy experience. I give him a little gift bag of like rare books and a couple joints, and then he gives me this random like photograph, which I've just perceived it as he's a weird artist guy, and he was doing sort of a meet and greet thing. I felt like he had taken a bunch of photos on a camera, got them developed, and then was just giving them out randomly or something, because I didn't process what was on this thing at all. It looked like a picture of a print still of a cartoon or something like that. And it didn't look like his art. It didn't look like anything super relevant. I just was like, cool, I have something from Tao Lin. I put it in the back of my book. Don't even process it. This book goes with me everywhere on this trip. And in Hawaii, I was reading it before, the mushroom experience.
Meanwhile, the photo just stays in the back of the book. It's in there.
It's with me the whole entire time. Travels all over to Australia with me, to Hawaii, comes home with me. And I'm like, oh, my book. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm not going to put the trip book in there, but I should put that little thing that Tao gave me in there. And it I pick up the book, it falls out dramatically.
In slow motion, just twirling.
Yeah. And I looked down and I just could not believe it. I pick up this thing and it's an octopus holding a baby octopus that's sleeping.
Oh my God.
And it just shattered my brain. I was like, how? That's
retro.
I
said no more.
I was like, that's retroactive. Like, how? Like, that happened even before the whole thing, and it's been waiting there for me this whole time.
Right.
So, yeah, these are just examples.
Well, I'm thinking about synchronicities because, they're happening to me more and more. We've talked about this, especially this year, and with people that I've met. And we just had one with the way that you connected Jennifer and I, which was, you had called me after your ayahuasca experience, and maybe like an hour before, I had gotten an Instagram message from her saying, hi, Hallie, I feel like I hadn't opened it though. I was like, hi, Hallie, I feel like we have a lot of overlap in our circles. Would love, to give you a press pass to Whitma. Let me know if you're interested. And so I had just seen her name pop up. And then I think I went to her profile and saw that you guys were connected. So I was like, I'm going to ask Colin who this is. And so then we get on the phone and I was like, hey, do you know this woman, Jennifer? And you were like, what? And I was like, what's going on? And you're like, I was going to ask you at the end of this call for your permission to connect you two, because I just feel like you're so aligned. And I was like, well, then of course do it. And in the end, she ended up sending me a screenshot because I had, did she send you that too?
Yeah.
It was like, I had texted her back and said, yeah, I was just on the phone with Colin. This weird thing happened. And so I guess in the same minute, you and I had both text message. And she was like, this is so weird. But so those things are happening more and more, but some people would say those are just coincidence. And your mind is searching for things, creating things, and you just want that to be the case, whatever it is. What would you say to people who are holding that set of beliefs?
That I understand, and really, for me, I never let go of the possibility that that's the case, right? In fact, like my mindset when I experience these things is I run it through this set of skeptical filters first. I'm like, how can I explain this? And, even now, everything that I just described, I could still give you a very logical pattern recognition type of example or explanation for it all. Does it satisfy? It doesn't satisfy me because it goes so much deeper and because it feels just a little too ridiculous. And for people in my life that are highly skeptical, who know the full story, I've gotten what the fucks out of all of them. They're all like, that is crazy. That is the craziest example of this stuff I've ever heard. So I think it's absolutely healthy to say that, there are random coincidences. But I also think that for myself, the beauty of all this stuff is that you don't have to know. And that also means you don't have to write it off. You can just let it be. And, sort of like the Terence McKenna quote that I brought out last night was like about paradox and about essentially like how do you deal with like the liminal zone of, one thing seems very true, but yet it simultaneously feels totally untrue. And McKenna had this beautiful, he's basically talking about how we live in a male dominant society. And that means that even when it comes to questions, we want to dominate questions and know the answers for sure and close the books and be like, we've solved that one, and that he said that the key to all of this is not answering it, and that we should all be sitting in the messiness of the mystery and enjoying it. And that would be the divine feminine approach to, questions. And that always just resonated with me. And, I think that when it comes to these kind of things, I prefer to sit in the mess. I prefer to be in awe.
Yeah, I think that often makes the most sense. I mean, life is kind of messy. And again, for me, it comes back to surrendering, but that's when things are making the most sense. When I accept that there is a paradox, or even, going back to your story about the octopus and life and loneliness. And, this octopus on some level being maybe a symbol for this subconscious part of yourself that you banished. And thinking about even in my own life, as I look around at I was telling you last night, this neat little cute apartment where everything is in its place, and I get up at the time that I want, and I do the things that I want, and I create the things that I want, and then having people come in and out of my life and realizing that when you create intimate connection, you have to be vulnerable. And that's why there's this paradox, there's this dichotomy. We want to isolate and we want to curate a life that we can control in some manner so that we can be comfortable, because to some degree we don't want to, be obliterated all the time by emotions and feelings and things that make us uncomfortable. So we create our neat little boxes, and then it's nice. And then it's also really lonely. So you start letting people in, and they fuck all your shit up and they push all your buttons, and you're so happy and you're so upset at the same time.
Yeah. And to sort of like bring it home and tie it together, for me, even though I have this skeptical side, this logical side, these were so convincing to me that I started following them. I started getting on airplanes. I started buying tickets to events and things that it was directly pointing me towards. It was connecting me to people. I was meeting people through these synchronicities and making deep connections. And I felt like I can't turn away from this. This was the call. This was my call to adventure. This was my this was a hero's journey for me. I had to suspend my, my skepticism to a point where I had no good reason to not to, other than fear, complacency. Like, I had all the tools at my disposal to have an adventure and follow these and see where they would lead me. And I knew that if I didn't, it wasn't because these are just silly or because like have better things to do. It would have been because I was afraid or because I was too comfortable. And so I decided to say yes to them and see where they would lead me. And it was pretty miraculous where they led me. And I will not swear to anyone that was God or that was some higher dimensional octopi entity. Sorry, friend. I do love you, though. I'm not going to force anyone to believe that. All I know is that it's convinced me that there is higher intelligence, even if that's just simply the superconscious, your own. It's also convinced me of the idea of retrocausality, that time doesn't flow in the way we think it does, that our brains can receive information from our own brains in a future state, and that is a function of our existence that we're just not quite, we don't have the science to back it up yet, but I do believe that one day we will. So these are the kind of things that I get into, but mostly, I just say, try it. Like if you notice, and a lot of it does come down to noticing. It comes down to opening your awareness and allowing yourself to pay attention to the small things going around you. I mean,
they're always there.
Absolutely.
It's just about opening to it.
See your everyday as if it was a painting in a museum that you really wanted to figure out. It was like, why is this here? Why is that there? The placement of this. If you start looking at every frame of your daily existence in this way as much as possible, I would put money on the fact that this stuff starts to happen. And the more you notice it, the more it'll happen even more.
Right. Or like paying attention to animal life. You start to see it all the time then. And then even the act of looking up, oh, well, what does this animal mean? I mean, some people would be skeptical. Well, you just saw an ant, like chill out, doesn't mean anything. But still, I believe in the same way that I don't know what's going on with tarot cards, astrology stuff, but what I do know is our brain makes meaning out of things that we see. So you pull a card, or maybe you see a beetle, and then you go to read the description of the card or the beetle, and there's a line in it of that description that really lands with you. And you go, oh yeah, that's what I needed to hear. Now somebody who's a skeptic, and the same thing about psychics, quote, air quote, psychics. It's like, oh, well, they're just saying very generic things. Well, does it really matter what's being said if you're pulling something meaningful from it? That's a message for you. Maybe you couldn't uncover that part of your unconscious or your subconscious without kind of using this to dust it away. So, people who are thinking about have kids start seeing kids everywhere. Or, people are trying to get pregnant, or you want to get a puppy. You start hooking into that onion layer of reality where you just are seeing dogs everywhere. Yeah. So yeah, I've definitely had some. We've talked about my dreams because I have this wacky dream space where, especially lately, it's my dreams have been getting very, very long. So. I'll wake up in the morning, and this is something Eric Godsey actually taught me, is instead of journaling, I'm now voice note recording my retellings because my journalings were starting to get so long. And when you first wake up, you're kind of out of it and you're tripping up over your words. And it was actually stopping my dream recall at the level that I wanted. So now I have these recordings of these dreams that the recording itself is over 20 minutes. So I'm talking for over 20 minutes at a dream that must be 2 or 3 hours in length, like movie length. and having really weird things happen. Like, I had a dream in January that I met a certain person, a high profile person in a cafe. And then in June, I met that person in a cafe in the same manner. And I remember having that surreal moment where it was like, oh yeah, let's connect. We'll talk later. And going, I dreamt this, like having the awareness that I had dreamt it, feeling a little bit nuts about it. And I was like, I can't tell anyone about this. This is so wild. And even last week, well, because, I just got in a car accident, which I'll talk about that for a second. But the week before that, I called Godsey again because I had this really strange dream, long dream that I was inside of a video game, inside of a game. And it was almost like being in Westworld, where some people in the game or amusement park knew they were playing it and other people were not aware that they were playing it. And a whole bunch of crazy things were happening. There were like foot soldiers being sent and lighting these different cabins on fire. We were kind of in the woods in these cabins on a lake. And I remember hanging in the burning rafters, trying to hide from these bad guys and rolling through grass and kind of just going rogue and hiding in the shadows. And eventually the way that the game was won was the sun would come up. And if you had basically survived the dark night of the soul, if you will, then the sun would come up and you had won the game. Oh, wow. So the sun came up and I won this game. And there weren't many people who had really won it. There were some of my other friends. And then we had this weird scene of celebrating. Like, it was so strange. We were taking selfies in the dream of like, yeah, we did. Almost like when you break out of an escape room. It was like, yeah, we did it. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do now? There's only this game. So I was like, well, I guess I have to play again, but this time I'm going to do it differently. So this time I went back into the game and I was like, I'm going to just be rogue. Like, I'm going to kind of like fuck some shit up. And I had done everything perfectly and very morally and hidden in the shadows. And this time I was just kind of messing with things. And I remember in this dream, long story short, there was kind of like an innocent groundskeeper of this game who wasn't aware that she was, in a game. So I had more sentience, or this feeling of sentience in the game, and I knew that I could do whatever I wanted in this game, and that the way to reset it was by going to the clock. And clicking on the clock. Because in a lot of video games, that's actually how you save. Yeah. You walk to a clock or something. So I knew I was going to be fine. I could do whatever I want. And I ended up going to this little housekeeper's cottage off the side of the big hill, next to the big boss's house, and locking her out and just going through her stuff and kind of taunting her through the window. And she was banging on the window like, please let me in, please let me in. And I was just kind of smirking and being really just like this nasty, dark part of myself. And it felt yucky in my stomach in the dream. I was like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right, but I can just reset it. Like, I can erase all of this. She's not going to remember, and she's not real. And I ended up kind of finding some stuff in her bag. Like, she had 2 passports and a bunch of cash. And so I kind of opened the sliding door. I threw it at her and basically exposing her to whatever secret ring she was in. And I had a water bottle on me, which was my real green Nalgene in real life. And in this dream, I opened up the sliding glass door and I was like renegade gonna show her the law. And I was going to show her the law and basically like punish her for what she was. And I threw my water bottle at this woman's head and knocked her down, and blood started to like drip from her forehead down her face. And then I was like, oh no. Okay, that was weird. And I'm starting to not like this. She started to get up And I looked down and my water bottle was reset in my hand again, like a real video game. And I was like, this is so weird. So I threw it again because I was scared now. I was like, I should probably just kill her because she's going to get up and get me in trouble or something. And I missed. So now I really had this sense that time was running out and that people were on the way. And I'm locked in this house and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get out. Should I escape or should I just, no, I'm going to go to the clock. I'm going to reset the game. So I walk to the clock and I pick it up. And now I can hear alarms going off in the background. I know people are coming to get me. I pick up the clock and I get this sinking feeling because I can't remember which buttons I have to press to reset the game. And I was like, no, why did I do that? Why did I hurt this person? And the reality starts setting in. I don't know how to climb back out through these layers of consciousness into the real world. Now I'm stuck in this game, in a very bad ending of this game. And these people are on the way. They're probably going to throw me in jail or abuse me because there are no laws here. And I am going to have to be okay with this, with what I've chosen, with what I've done. And this happened about 4 days before my car accident.
Whoa.
So I'll talk about that. I was on the way home from a family wedding in Pennsylvania. I had left maybe 5 minutes before, just pulling onto the highway at the first exit that I need to take to get onto the thruway. And I'm on the interstate. Speed limit's about 60 miles per hour. And I'm changing lanes. I'm currently in the middle lane of a 3-lane highway. And I'm passing from the middle lane to the exit, which is on the leftmost, so closest to the median. While I'm starting to pass, I see something in the distance, not very far off, and my brain does the thing where it's, what is this thing? And it identifies it as, wait a minute, is that a person in the middle of the highway? There's a man getting off of his bicycle in the middle of the highway, kind of there's where the lanes split off, there's those white lines. And he was pausing almost in this like lane split area, presumably to let the cars go past and then continue walking across. And I don't know why this man was on the highway. He was not wearing a helmet. It's completely illegal to be on any sort of interstate on a bicycle. And brain did the calculations as quickly as it could. And it was like, okay, yeah, he's stopping. Like it clearly looked like he was going to wait. But I'm mid-lane change. And me or him, the timing was off. He obviously didn't expect me to be coming. And I realized I'm not going to be able to stop in time. This man is crossing through the lane that I am driving in. And it happened so fast. I slowed down as quickly as I could, heard the noise and couldn't process at all what just happened. I put my car in park. All I knew is that my windshield was shattered on the right side. So I remember those weighted, heavy, pregnant, long moments getting out of my car, thinking, am I going to see a dead body on the pavement or a live one? It's a different thing to hit somebody in a vehicle. There's something so sickening about hitting a vulnerable human body, just with no protection. So I got out of the car and this man is kind of balled up on the ground. His bike is just mangled. And he's trying to get up. He had 2 grocery bags, there's stuff everywhere. He's trying to get up. I'm telling him to just stay down. I also asked someone to call 911. And I was just reeling. I thought I was in a dream. I was like, this is surreal. I looked down at my body. I'm like, am I in a body? Am I okay? Because you can't feel anything. Your adrenaline is so high. I was looking for cuts, because the glass had just shattered, and I was sure at least I had glass in my skin or, seatbelt injuries or something. I looked down. I was like, I think my body's okay, but I can't tell right now. And I'm just going to stand here. And then it was just a blur of people. The miraculous thing is within under 2 minutes, honestly, maybe 10 cars had stopped in those white painted lines where we were all parked. There was enough space for cars to actually stop to help out. Whoa. There was a minister in full garb who got out and started to say prayers. There was 2 off-duty EMS workers. So they had their whole first aid kit, neck brace, everything. Then there was a retired police officer, all within, seriously, 2 to 5 minutes.
So crazy.
And I just stood there with the sound of the highway passing me on both sides, the sirens, which felt like the alarm bells going off in the background, like from my dream. And I had these echoes of that dream, and I remembered the feeling of looking at that clock, not being able to reset it. And in that moment, I had this strange sensation of all the different realities that could have been from this particular moment. There was one reality in which he died. There was one reality in which I died. I mean, they looked at my car and they could not believe my airbag did not go off at the speed I was going at. To be honest, if it had, I'd be dealing with I wouldn't be sitting here probably in front of you. I'd be dealing with a lot of different injuries, including face injuries and shoulder injuries and all of this. And I could have not had the vision. I could have gone right into the concrete median. And then there's one reality where it didn't happen at all, where I just drove safely back to New York, right? And so I was, in this strange way, pulled out of the scene of the accident, watching all of this from above, going, any of these realities is perfectly plausible. And actually, none of them are wrong or right. Granted, 1 or 2 of them might be a little less uncomfortable, more uncomfortable, but none of them are viscerally right or wrong.
Yeah.
So I, in that moment, surrendered. I didn't know whether I was going to get in trouble. I knew you weren't supposed to hit people. I didn't know the legalities of, and nothing. You don't know anything. I didn't know if he was going to live. I couldn't do anything to make time go faster. I just had to stand there by myself in the middle of the highway, feeling terrified. And I said, you feel terrified? Okay. And I decided in that moment not to imprint that terror, not to carry any guilt or shame, and just realize this is a thing that happened. And the best thing I can do is to let these feelings pass through me like a sieve. Yeah. I don't have to imprint them. I don't know what's going to happen. And there was this strange grace that opened up because I wasn't fixated on my podcast or my company or flying to Costa Rica or any of the things that are going on. I just had to be snapped right into my body, shutting everything up there. So.
And then what you did, didn't you drive 7 hours back to get, that was the return after your journey.
Seriously, well, actually, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what made sense. I was like, well, do I go back to New York? Do I get a rental car? Do I fly? And then there was an intuition of, I really need chiropractic care right now. And I actually work with a coach, and she does this kind of muscle testing work, and she does energy work, and she was checking in with my body energetically. And she didn't know this about my family, but she said, I'm checking in with you after this accident. I actually talked to her later that day. Wow. We had a call scheduled and I didn't cancel it.
Wow.
And she said, your body's telling me that it needs chiropractic. Do you know anyone who does that? I said, yeah, both my parents are chiropractors. And she's like, oh, yeah, your body is needing chiropractic in the next 2 to 3 days. So at that point, there was nothing else on the agenda other than just to trust what was happening. And if that's what my body wanted, which I couldn't see why not, that's what made sense. And so I did. I went to Buffalo, and my dad treated me all week up until I got back last night.
Yeah. And you completed the cycle. And now you're back in the Shire.
Oh, great.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, God. I'm so glad you're okay.
Oh, yeah.
But
Thank you.
That story is incredible. And
I do have a question for you, actually, about all of this, because we talked about the threshold guardian, or the guardian of the threshold, as it's called. And how do you decipher when you meet up against something that is resistance? How do you know whether you're supposed to,
fight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to assume what the answer is, but I still want to hear, because some people would say, well, there's this idea of never give up. So you got to push through the hard stuff. And then some people would say, no, when things get hard, you just completely let go into it, and you realize that you have no control over the situation. So what do we do when we meet that resistance?
That's a really good question. I think, again, this is very unique to the individual, and I think it's unique to each story, and it has a lot to do with intuition, I think. And it's kind of like you have to know, in your case, there was nothing you could do that would help more than just sitting in stillness and realizing that you just had to be present in that moment. And there really was no way out, right? Like, I mean, I guess you could say, like, there is, like, you could have laid down on the ground or something. You could have curled up in a ball. You could have done some things. But all in all, like, the only real way to get through that was just to survive it and to realize that you couldn't just go to sleep. You couldn't just, escape. There was no way to escape it. And I think those kind of moments there's every sign is pointing to surrender. Not to give up, but to perhaps give up in that moment trying to control. And, sometimes the hero's journey can, getting back to, like, the surfboard analogy, at a certain point when you're surfing, you are also letting go of control, because you're communing with another force that's taking you somewhere. And I think it's kind of like knowing when to ride the wave and when to, like, bail, etc. There's always going to be another wave. That's kind of, first off, you gotta know that, and know that, like, I've had, sort of these paranoid moments of, like, did I unknowingly refuse the call? Did I unknowingly miss my chance? And again, there'll be another one. So in this, through this lens, I think you can kind of tell a dark night of the soul from a normal threshold guardian when the threshold guardians can sort of be seen as extensions of your own resistance, in many ways, usually. When that's not there, and it's something bigger and out of your control, and you can see that there's probably a deep lesson in it, I think that's the sign, that's the indicator that it's time to surrender.
Yeah, and I'm thinking again about the accident. That was my immediate inclination, was to still standing there on the highway, I go, okay, what's the lesson in this? And along with that sense of grace that had opened up, there was this calm, and there was this voice that came in and said, this is the sort of thing that you've been training for. And I went, oh, okay, I can control my breathing. I can control. And I thought of my plant medicine ceremonies, and I thought of breath work, and I thought of meditation. And I was like, oh, this is how I break the old Hallie cycle of freaking out in emergency. This is how I create a new me. This is another moment of rebirth. I was upstate in Buffalo this week, obviously, as I mentioned, and I was having this conversation with my stepmom about different, I'm really nerding out over the Esther Hicks, Abraham Hicks kind of law of attraction stuff lately. I've been on that, and my stepmom's a big fan. And I said, oh, do you listen to the audiobooks? And she said, no, I just go on YouTube every morning and I let whatever is popping up that I need to hear be there. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So this morning, as I was setting up the podcast equipment before you came, I was like, I'm going to do the YouTube thing and put on a thing. And then I opened up YouTube. I typed in Esther Hicks, and the first thing that comes up is, no accident is accidental. I was like, what the? Wow. That is a crazy synchronicity. And she retells a story of a car accident she was in. You know, and how on some level she had attracted it or created it. And I was reflecting in that moment again on the highway. There was a lot of time to think. I said, I asked for this, and not in a direct way, but life has felt really crazy the last 6 weeks. And one thing that I said or have been saying in the morning was like, universe, this is great stuff, but like, I need you to slow it down. I need you to slow it down. And I was starting to feel kind of resentful of all the good things that are going on in my life. You know, new people, new relationships, and getting ready to go to Costa Rica and be at Soltara and the podcast. But then I was like, this is just too much. And I was getting really curmudgeon-y about it. And my body started to slow down. And I've been putting off sleep and just pushing for that extra interview and all of these things. And then this moment happens with this accident. And the strangest thing is, they looked back at the video. The cameras were pointed the other way. There were 15 people that stopped on the highway. Nobody had an eyewitness in the moment account. Even both people who called 911 right after didn't actually see it happen. That's how fast it happened. Wow. The only people that really experienced it were myself and this cyclist. And that's how I know it was for us. It was for me, and it was for him. And that's hard to own. And but it's also beautiful. And I joked about it after. I was like, I guess I just need to get more specific with what I am trying to manifest from the universe. I will be more specific. Thank you. Noted. Yeah.
Incredible.
Colin, it has been so fun to have you here. Finally, I have envisioned and manifested this moment. I think we both have.
Yes.
I was so surprised when you called me and told me you were coming to New York, because it was like, oh, someday either I'll be in Portland or you'll be around, whatever. And then here it was. So feels again like it was just meant to be. And I definitely feel it will not be our last time.
Oh, no.
Before we sign off, though, you also, because you're starting a podcast called The Cosmic Nod. Ooh, I like how we coordinated that.
Yeah, that was nice.
And which is a great name, and I believe inspired by your time with ayahuasca, which is funny because I told you that the Thought Room, that title also came to me during my experience at Soltara, my first experience in May. So for that, are there any questions you you want to throw my way?
You know, I honestly think that we need a full episode because I talked way too much on this one for it to be for mine, and I have so many questions for you, and yeah, I'm just trying to listen to that intuitive voice that's telling me, no, you need like a couple more hours.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm rushing you through some questions.
Yeah.
So I will say that this will be a perfect tease for part 2, which will ensue.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been awesome.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.